Chapter 4, Beaten Without Mercy, covering the years 1922 to 1923. On May 5, 1923, Ella Branham bore her 8th son, naming him Howard Duffy. He joined Charles Jr., age 4, Jesse, 7, Edgar, 9, Melvin, 11, Henry, 12, Edward, 13, and William, who was now 14 years old. Charles Branham was finding it increasingly difficult to feed his 8 children, especially during the colder months. By the winter of 1922-1923, Billy was running a trap line to help put food on the table. The wooded parts of Mr. Wathan's land teemed with muskrats, opossums, rabbits, beavers, and skunks. At 2 o'clock every morning, Billy went out with his lantern to inspect his traps, often getting back to the house just in time to go to school. Because he only owned 1 pair of clothes, many times he sat in class smelling like the skunk he had skinned earlier that morning, much to the disgust of the other students. But his extra effort paid off for his family. When he trapped a rabbit, he could sell it for 15 cents. Then he could buy a box of 22 shells and shoot 3 or 4 more rabbits. His mother would serve a rabbit for supper along with biscuits and gravy. The rest Billy would sell in town, using the money to buy cornmeal or wheat flour. The trip into town often depressed Billy. The Branhams had a bad reputation around Jeffersonville, and more than once people had crossed to the other side of the street to avoid Billy. Some people would talk to him as long as nobody could see them doing it, but if anyone else came around, the person talking to Billy would quit and walk away. That hurt. Billy knew his father and his uncles were a rough bunch, smoking, chewing tobacco, gambling, drinking, and bootlegging, but Billy thought bitterly, "What have I done? I'm not guilty of that. I've never drank in my life. Why do I have to be lumped in with that?" Not that Billy hadn't tried to drink. One Sunday morning in the spring, he and Edward were walking down to the river with their father and Mr. Dornbush, the neighbor who had done the welding on Charles Stills. The 2 boys were planning to take their old leaky rowboat up and down the river to search for discarded glass bottles. Charles always needed bottles for his homemade brew, and he paid well for them, a nickel a dozen. Mr. Dornbush had shown a liking for Billy, and now Billy was trying to impress the man, hoping that Mr. Dornbush would lend him his watertight rowboat for the morning. Billy's boat didn't have a rudder, making it difficult to handle in stiff current. For oars, Billy had to use 2 old boards. He would paddle awkwardly on one side of the boat while Edward paddled on the other. Near the river, a tree had blown across the path. Charles threw his leg over the tree, but instead of climbing over, he leaned back on a branch and said, "Let's stop here for a little refreshment." Pulling a small, flat bottle of whiskey from his back pocket, he tipped it above his lips, then handed it to his friend. Mr. Dornbush took a drink and handed it back to Charles, who nestled it in the branches of a sucker near the upturned roots. To Billy this looked like as good a time as any to ask for a favor. "Mr. Dornbush, do you think my brother and I could borrow your boat for the morning?" "Sure, Billy, that would be fine." Quivering with excitement, Billy thought, "Here's one guy who likes me." Charles took another swig of whiskey and passed it back to his friend. When Mr. Dornbush had quenched his thirst, he handed the bottle to Billy, saying, "Here you are, Billy. Have a drink." Billy said, "No thanks, I don't drink." Mr. Dornbush looked startled. "You mean to tell me you're an Irishman and a Branham, and you don't drink?" Charles nodded with a look of disgust on his face, saying, "I'm raising a bunch of boys, but only one of them is a sissy, and that's Bill." Billy flared. "Me? A sissy?" He recoiled at the very idea. "I'm sick and tired of being called a sissy. Hand me that bottle." Mr. Dornbush extended the flask. Billy jerked it from the man's hand, pulled out the stopper, and pressed it to his lips with angry determination. He started to tip it up, but before a single drop of whiskey dribbled into his mouth, he heard a noise like leaves being stirred by a whirlwind. Whoosh! His hand stayed, the bottle poised at his lips. Whoosh! It wasn't his imagination. He heard it as clearly as he heard the conversation around him. Whoosh! Billy's memory flashed back to that voice in the poplar tree, commanding, Don't ever drink or smoke or defile your body in any way. There will be a work for you to do when you get older. Terrified, Billy dropped the bottle and took off through the field as hard as he could go, crying bitter tears of frustration and confusion. Charles sneered. See what I told you? That one is a sissy. Any direction Billy turned, life showed its jagged teeth. He continued his schoolhouse education through the 7th grade. It was like hiking uphill on crutches. The rural school system required students to buy their own books and supplies. Billy's parents didn't have enough money for pencils and paper, let alone school primers, so every time Billy needed to study his lessons, he had to borrow a book from another student. The school curriculum of the time was designed to help mold a child's moral character as well as his intellect. One lesson that deeply touched Billy was a study of Longfellow's poem, Psalm of Life. Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream, for the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem. Life is real, life is earnest, and the grave is not its goal. Dust thou art, to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul. Not enjoyment and not sorrow is our destined end or way, but to act that each tomorrow finds us further than today. Art is long and time is fleeting, and our hearts, though stout and brave, still like muffled drums are beating funeral marches to the grave. In the world's broad field of battle, in the bivouac of life, be not like dumb-driven cattle, be a hero in the strife. Trust no future, however pleasant, let the dead past bury its dead. Act, act in the living present, heart within and God overhead. Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and, departing, leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. Footprints that perhaps another, sailing over life's solemn main, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother, seeing, shall take heart again. Let us then be up and doing, with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. This poem inspired Billy, yet not in his wildest dreams could he have imagined the deep footprints his own life would leave on the sands of time. For now Longfellow's poem sang a song of hope in a dreary land. These lofty words spoke to Billy's heart, encouraging this disheveled 14-year-old boy struggling to understand all the injustices he saw in his own life. The older boys taunted and badgered him at every opportunity for being born in Kentucky, for being poor, for being small for his age, and for being different. By now, Billy understood the reason for his family's poverty, his father's drinking problem. One day when the school children were making fun of him because he dressed so raggedly, Billy read an episode in a history book about Abraham Lincoln getting off a boat in New Orleans and passing a slave auction. According to this account, Abraham Lincoln saw white men bidding on a big, strong colored man, while the slave's wife and children stood at the side weeping. Lincoln slapped his hands together and said, "That's wrong, and someday I'll hit that thing, even if it takes my life." Billy pushed the history book back and thought, "Drinking is wrong too, and someday I'll hit it, even if it takes my life." But nothing flared his imagination more than when he read about the Arizona desert in his geography primer. He longed to be there, longed to ride the open range studded with cactus. It sounded so romantic, so peaceful, so idyllic. The poet within him stirred, but he had nothing on which to write his thoughts. So he borrowed a piece of paper from the student next to him and wrote, "I am lonesome, oh so lonesome, for that far-away southwest, where the shadows fall the deepest over the mountain crest. I can see a lurking coyote all around the purple haze. I can hear a lobo hollerin' down where the longhorns graze, and somewhere up a canyon I can hear a lion whine in those far-off Catalina mountains at the Arizona line." Unfortunately, the harassment from older boys went further than mocking and jeering. After school, they would gang up on him repeatedly. Although small for his age, Billy had grit and enough temper to fight a buzzsaw. The boys would knock him down and he would get up again. They would keep knocking him down until he didn't have the strength to get back up. Many times he sucked his supper through a straw, his mouth too badly mashed for him to eat solid food. One spring day in 1923, Billy walked a girl home from school carrying her books. On the way back to his cabin, 5 bullies surrounded him. They shoved him into the dirt. One sneered, "Why are you walking with that girl?" Another taunted, "Yeah, we don't want you walking with her, you dirty Kentucky squab." They knew Billy was born in Kentucky and that his mother was half Indian, making her a squaw, so they derided him by calling him a Kentucky squab. At that insult, Billy jumped to his feet and charged, his fists swinging wildly, but 5 were too many. The bullies wrestled with him until they had his arms pinned. Then, while 4 boys held him helpless, one boy took a rock in his fist and pounded Billy in the face until he sagged, almost senseless. Billy pleaded with them, "If you'll just let me go, I'll go right straight home, I promise." Since he was nearly unconscious anyway, the boys agreed. But first they threw him down, scraped his face in the hard dirt road, then kicked him a few times for a finishing touch of meanness before they left. Billy did go straight home, but not to stay. He took down the .22 Winchester rifle that hung above the cabin door, filled it with 16 bullets. Then he took a shortcut through a locust thicket to a point on the road where he knew those boys would pass. He hid beside the road and waited. Soon he heard voices. "That'll teach that corn cracker to walk with a girl," one said. Another chimed, "Did you see how scared he looked?" Another added, "Yeah, that Kentucky squab will realize where he's at from this on." Stepping out from behind the bushes, Billy barred their path with his rifle leveled and its hammer cocked. He said calmly, "Which one of you wants to die first? So you won't have to watch the others die." The 5 boys turned pale and squealed in terror and disbelief. Billy said, "Don't whine, 'cause you're all going to die, one by one." He pointed his gun barrel at the boy who had smashed him repeatedly with a rock, "beginning with you." He pulled the trigger. Click! The bullet didn't fire. Quickly Billy jerked back the bolt, forcing another shell into the chamber. Click! It misfired too. By this time the 5 boys were running, screaming, diving over ditches and around trees, trying to get out of there as fast as they could. Billy, with every intention of killing them, kept pumping shells into the chamber and pulling the trigger as fast as he could work the action. Click! 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 But every shell misfired. The 5 boys were long gone. Scattered around the ground beside Billy lay 16 bullets. He picked them up, blew the dirt off them, and put them back in the gun. Then he aimed his rifle at a tree and started pulling the trigger. Crack! 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 This time every shell fired, slamming into the trunk, sending the bark flying in every direction. Billy stood in the middle of the road, seething with anger. Then suddenly he started to laugh, a hard, idiotic laugh that boiled out from the depth of his frustration. He laughed so hard that tears ran down his swollen cheeks. That year, when school let out for the summer, Billy walked away and never went back.